Thank you folks for clicking on the video. If you'd like to be informed when new videos go live, please hit that subscribe button and don't forget to hit that bell notification icon. Please feel free to like, comment, and share the video with family and friends, as it really does help the channel grow in the current YouTube algorithm structure. Hello everybody and welcome back to Swamp Dog Games. Today we are going to be reviewing Twilight 2000, the 4th edition available from Free League. I had bought this ages ago, back when it first came out, this edition. I've never had the opportunity to play it. I took the shrink wrap off. I don't think I even opened up the box when I first got it, because this was about the time when I just about had it. With 5th edition in the direction it was going, I wanted something new, and I found the OSR community at the same time, jumped headfirst into that, and never looked back. But in light of recent developments with the OGL and what that might have negative impacts on the OSR community, decided to dig out my copy of Twilight 2000 and actually open her up and see what I missed out on and could have been playing that is not beholden to Wizards' evil chicanery. The brief history of Twilight 2000. This is an old RPG. This came out in the 80s. The idea being this is role-playing in World War III that never was. The original rules, the reason why it has 2000 was because the setting coming out in the 80s was that World War III kicked off in the year 2000. Needless to say, after 3 editions, I believe the 3rd edition came out in like the 2010s, they realized that they needed to shift their story. So I believe, if I remember through my brief research online correctly, that the story is no longer that World War III kicked off in the year 2000. It's now that the coup that brought down the Soviet Union actually, the coup that failed to try to preserve the Soviet Union actually succeeded. So the Soviet Union was preserved, and World War III kicked off as a result. This set is you are one of the survivors of the Twilight War, and you're now just trying to survive. It's very post-apocalyptic, but unlike Fallout, which goes very Gonzo-themed, this is much more in tune with realistic thinking of what a post-apocalyptic world would look like post-World War III, though this did have a much more limited nuclear war in this setting, just because if you had total nuclear war, I doubt you would have any survivors left to actually do anything. So let's open this up and see what we get inside Twilight 2000. I believe this, for the most part, uses Free League's standard D6 system, which is essentially you roll more die based upon your character attribute and skills. The goal being the more die you roll, the more likely you'll have a 6. The more 6s you roll, the better of success. In that vein, it's kind of similar to... I played Shadowrun 3rd edition. It kind of reminds me of that same venue, but the math is different, though this does have some more custom die in it. I'm sort of hit and miss with custom die. You have examples of like what Fantasy Flight did with their RPG systems, where I think they took it too far. Some items like this, where you have your hit die location table, legs, chest, head, arms. That's not too bad an idea, because it does simplify it. Rather than having to look at the chart or just remembering it, you just roll it and go arm shot, arm shot, arm shot. Beginning to wonder if this is weighted. Okay, there's a chest shot, leg shot. should have a 1 in 6 chance of getting a headshot, and so far we're definitely not getting that. So definitely in this game, if I'm playing this, I need arm armor, probably much more than I need chest armor. I'll cheat. Headshot. Finally got it. But these die are usable, and they do promise that you can use normal die. It just makes it a little bit faster if you use their custom die. It does include some sort of card game mechanic for combat. I'm not sure how integrated this is. I have not read the rules yet. This is just an unboxing, and then later I'll actually be reading the rules and finishing up this video on another day. But I'm assuming this is your standard deck of 52. It has an initiative card system, some encounter information cards, and it looks like they did decide that yes, you could use a standard deck of 52 with this. But again, it speeds up the gameplay if you have the actual descriptions on the cards rather than having to cross-reference your deck of 52 against a table. This is the type of mechanic I don't mind, where yes, we introduce our own cards, our own gimmick die, but it's just there to make it easier. You can still play our game completely fine without it. It just is a convenience factor if you buy our product, because then you don't have to cross-reference it. This type of support gimmick I don't mind. It's not as bad as, again, Fantasy Flight with their custom die, where it was a little bit harder to justify it, but you could still play the game with regular die. It just made it a lot harder, in my opinion. This is, again, a simplification mechanism that isn't too bad in comparison. But it looks like it's got both combat and non-combat encounters, like forest fires and random rogues, rogue prisoners just walking around the countryside. I see a Marine Corps 2nd Division logo. This is a SMEAC. The SMEAC is Situation Mission Execution, Command and Signal. No, Admin and Logistics Command and Signal is a SMEAC. This one they went with Service Support instead of Admin and Logistics, and then Command and Signal. Also known as a 5-paragraph order. It's just the standard way that you're supposed to write mission orders in at least the Marine Corps, and I believe the 5-paragraph order is standard across all U.S. service branches. And then, yeah, so it includes 2 missions out of the bat for you to play in. One with you apparently part of 2nd Marine Division, and then another one where you're attached to the Army's 5th Infantry Division adventure. If you want to see what all these symbols mean, you can go on to Wikipedia and look up NATO map codes, and they'll explain what all these are. These circle ones are tanks. The X's above them are a type of core level, not core. I think it's unit size, or it's the core that it's attached to. It's been ages since I've looked at that. The X's, I believe, are just infantry. The X with the oval shape is mechanized infantry battle plan, and then the blue rectangles are friendly forces. The red squares in the diamond shape are enemy forces. So graphically, presentation-wise, they apparently did some thought into this and created a very nice, pleasurable map. Now, recently I bought the Free League RPG Forbidden Lands as part of a Humble Bundle, so I have a limited amount of experience with Free League RPGs. But at least as far as Forbidden Lands was concerned, they had a great hex map that they used for a dungeon crawl. This does not necessarily seem to be a dungeon crawl. This is a very tactical sized map with the buildings. This reminds me a lot more of essentially an infantry-sized hex map for infantry engagements rather than for hex crawling off of multitudes of miles of terrain. So you do have at least 2 tactical maps. This looks like a prison with its own farm that you can play in. So it does provide some tactical maps. This is what I was thinking of. This I'm not going to be able to show fully, but this is the type of hex map that they provide that really allows for dungeon crawling in Free League products. As you can see, this is big enough and sized that there wouldn't be any issue doing a hex crawl with this map. I mean, even without graphically it would look out of place, but you could even use this map as a fantasy hex crawl. Now, since Free League is Scandinavian, I believe, though some of the town names, I feel like I don't speak a foreign language, but especially with Minsk here, Warzawa, this feels almost Polish to me. And considering the fact of where this is taking place in Europe, no, here's Stockholm, so this could be a map of their local countryside outside of Free League's headquarters. I don't know. Anyway, big hex map for dungeon crawling in this environment. We do have our custom character sheets, which you can always print off more online. Yeah, including ones that are more printer-friendly than all of this fake file background with paperclip. Well, they do include a nice number of these. Again, some more hex maps. And plenty of hex maps, too. It's been a while since I've opened up an RPG box that actually included maps in it for players, and this definitely looks like it can support squad-based engagements. Yeah, I probably never even opened this previously, because here is an entirety of tokens to use for playing this game. Includes a bunch of tokens. It seems like they can support multiple positions, because like here with the guy running on this side, he's prone. So I would hazard to guess that, I mean, this is my opinion, that there must be some sort of cover mechanic in the ranged combat, as well as introducing tokens for smoke grenades and probably explosions, minefields, and chemical warfare. The player's guides, or actually this is the referee's manual. The player's guide is a little bit thicker. It's your standard 8.5 by 11 letterhead booklet. Both of these, when you compare it to my Swords and Wizardry or Basic Fantasy, they're about the same size, if maybe a little bit smaller, depth-wise. They believe this was also Kickstarter backed. Yep, because here's a special thanks to all their Kickstarter supporters that helped them do this. Of course, they still have the original GDW reference in here for trademark. GDW was the original creators. And then Free League now has the license. I hope they continue that license for a while. The book, just a review from the quality perspective of the graphics, the artwork, the design work, the layout. It looks like they did a pretty good job. Of course, all your standard weapons. Due to Free League's Free League Workshop, Drive-Thru RPG also has some additional material that you can buy. Like, one is a Ukrainian weapons guide from the Cold War era, available Ukrainian weapons. You're not going to see modern firearms in here, and I mean modern post-year 2000. This focus is mainly on Cold War available firearms. But it does look like they do include some into the early 2000s weapons in here. Again, because under the original lore, that's when World War III actually kicked off. Ammunition prices, ammunition weight prices, vehicles that are available to the players or the enemies, Swedish military vehicles, home base. So it does have stronghold mechanics, it looks like. More Kickstarter backers, and then the referees booklet. The referees booklet is a little bit smaller than the player's tome. Here are all the NATO codes. See Order of Battle Poland. So it looks like one side was maybe Sweden, and then the other side... Oh, okay, yeah. The other one was Stockholm, was definitely Sweden. Well, of course, because it's got that. But what side is this? That's the Sweden side. Are both sides Sweden, or... I think that other one is Poland. Yeah, okay, I was right. This other one looked more Polish, the naming. And had I opened it up fully, it would have identified it as Central Poland. Okay, yeah, so one side is Poland, the other side is Sweden, that it provides adventures in. I see this, and my first thought is immediately that Red Rocket gas station from Fallout 4. Your encounter, deck of 52 stuff, random tables. Solo rules. Ooh, this is designed to even have a solo component. Honestly, post-COVID, RPGs do need to have, I think, solo rules in them. Not honestly, though, not just because of the pandemic, but because of modern lifestyle. I know my gaming ability has been drastically reduced because of my work schedule, and so to be able to play an RPG solo, right now my solo game of choice is D100, which I'll hopefully be doing a review on. I bought the RPGs. I want to actually save up and buy the books for a review. But everything that comes in this, it looks like everything that you need to start your own Twilight 2000 role-playing session. Again, this is just an initial review on the unboxing. The second half of this video will be on the rules themselves once I finish it. As far as the unboxing goes, however, from a box perspective, I definitely think that this is a good 17. It's everything that you need, all the special die, plenty of tokens, some maps for you to use. This feels almost more like a war game than an RPG, just because of the maps look like they all support either squad level tactics or strategic level movement. But I'll be following up shortly with the rules. I will be, through the power of YouTube, right back. All right, through the power of YouTube, I have returned. And this will include my review of the rules of this war game. I say war game. I'll explain in a minute what I mean. Going through, I like that the dual manual book system. Now, I know a lot of people don't like having two books. They like having everything in one. I used to be of that philosophy. Pathfinder, for instance, the one book instead of the player and GM's guide in separate booklets, having them together, even if you do have to buy the monster bestiary. Uh, However, because of the I like to play analog, I have found there is, even though it does increase costs for the end user, I do prefer the two manual or more setup. One thing I like about games like Necrotic Gnome's Old School Essentials is that, but though everything's included in the two books, there are some things that the players need that the game master doesn't, and vice versa. By having the split out into the two books, it does make it easier that I can hand the player their material. I can keep everything that I need in the referee's manual. I'm a little confused why on their website they only sell backup copies of the player's manual, because though these are pretty good quality, they are still, I forget what this type of stitching is called. It's glue bound. So there is, especially if you're going to be like pressing this hard against the table, this is going to eventually give out and you're going to need a replacement. All of the setting information is in the referee's manual, which thank you so much. I was correct in that it is now an alternate history, starting with the 1991 coup, and the players have all changed, and now this is a separate timeline where in the year 2000 the Twilight War began, limited nuclear exchange, and if you ever want to see what this would look like in real life, this type of engagement, I kept on going through this book and some of the timeline resources from previous editions. My whole thought is, this is if the Ukrainian conflict had expanded all throughout Europe and include a limited nuclear exchange. So the sad thing is, this is very scarily accurate to some of the problems we're dealing with today. This limited NATO versus Soviet Union war that they're doing. What I do like, though, is instead of saying, you will use our timeline or else, they have this little excerpt here for the game master. Hey, maybe you don't particularly want to use our timeline. Maybe you want to create your own. Maybe you just don't like the players involved. Hey, GM, just go wild. Whatever you do to fit with the theme of this RPG, however, keep it that somehow there's a NATO versus Soviet Union conflict, usually starting about the spring of the year 2000, and come up with whatever you want to fill in all the gaps however you feel. The sad thing is, this RPG, I feel like I'm one of the last generations that lived enough through the 90s to like remember the technology level and everything that they had available. Younger generations, I feel by the time setting of this is going to become somewhat of a historical artifact, this RPG, just because they won't have experience. None of them will ever know what a floppy is. And the idea of programming battle systems, battle computers based on floppy disks, and some of the limited technology they had to fight this war, and why, honestly, during this time period, you could have it been reduced to a limited, quote, limited nuclear conflict that would have still allowed military forces to continue. In here is a bunch of setting information, again, all separate from the player's guide. The game master can decide what he wants to use, what he wants to toss out. They do include settings, again, for Sweden, which I believe is Free League's Publishing's home country, which makes sense. And then Poland. The U.S. Army is in Poland, and then the 2nd Marine Division is in Sweden in this. Pretty much everything in this conflict takes place in Europe, which, by the way, Free League, if you don't already, I went onto your website and I didn't see it. Please, dear God, sell prints of your artwork. Looking through Forbidden Lands, I was like, this is some neat art. I am in love with the artwork from Twilight 2000. Like this very militaristic, post-apocalyptic artwork. In a way, it could almost be used like sort of zombie apocalypse thing. Just some amazing work. Some setting information, some brief encounters that you can do. The deck of 52, the cards make it easier, but you can also use the reference table for just the standard deck of 52 to figure out how you're going to play the game. It does include solo rules for if you're going to play this yourself. And conversion rules. What's interesting is it only includes conversions from the first and second editions of Twilight 2000. So I can imagine the third edition was significantly different. I'm hoping that's not just because, you are our competitor, therefore we're not going to support it, and instead just that it was so vastly different a setting that they decided to change it. So these are your conversion, which is nice. I wish that particularly ones that change so much throughout the generational iterations, would include update support. I'm looking at you, Dungeons and Dragons. Some people still liked original Dungeons and Dragons. Some still liked AD&D. Some like 3rd edition. To have an official conversion chart would be helpful. The game itself, though, I only briefly looked at Forbidden Lands when I bought it for the Humble Bundle review, so I didn't look at it that much in depth. This is my first time looking at a in-depth look at Free League's combat systems. Now, I'm assuming the dice system is the same across all of theirs. In Twilight 2000, the basic goal is to accomplish any task, get over a 6. Depending upon the quality of the attribute check / skill checks, you're going to be rolling either a d6, a d8, a d10, or a d12. Again, so you'll either start off with a 1 in 6 chance of completing the task based upon your attribute and skill qualification, or you can get like a 50% or higher. And I say higher chance of passing because under this system, you have your key attributes: strength, agility, intelligence, and empathy, and then sub-skills under those. Most of these are aimed at combat roles, though persuasion and command do have some out-of-combat utility, as well as medical aid, because that's going to be something that it's going to be difficult for a non-medical professional to talk through theater of the mind style to be able to solve that action. So I can see why they included that into their base skills. But for here as an example, if you didn't have any training in a skill, for example, medical first aid, you roll your base attribute empathy, and then if you have training in that skill, whatever the die that goes with it. So as you can see here, you would have only a 1 in 6 chance of being able to perform basic first aid on an individual because you only have the base attribute ability here to provide assistance. But over here, you would have more than a 50% chance of completing a heavy weapons check, for instance, because you have a D12, which gives you instantly a 50% chance of passing, and then a D10 on top of that. So I wish I'd looked at my percentage tables better. So that's a 2/3 or 3/5 passing chance. Whatever percentage that goes up to. Either way, it's above 50% chance of being able to pass a heavy weapons check. Other than these skills here, which are used because, again, it's slightly different to have people abstractly describe these situations without cheating, like with your driving, your range combat checks, and everything. Everything else is assumed to be theater of the mind. So if you're checking for traps, if you're, well, in this case, checking for mines, for instance, you would explain, hey, you're out there with a minesweeper going back and forth, or you're having to do it old school infantry style, where you're taking your bayonet and you're just like clearing the land in front of you very, very slowly to move forward. That's going to be how you do your most of your role playing. Again, for persuasion / command checks, those do have some impact on your role playing for if you're trying to convince an NPC, but mostly they want you to theater of the mind, describe what you're doing like old school D&D, rather than relying on skill checks for everything. You do have multiple hit locations, which impact the armor that you can wear in those locations, which impact how much damage you take. This is a very resource-intensive game. It's not like 5th edition, where the cleric can just pop out water and food at a moment's notice, so you don't have to pack any supplies to go adventuring. Here, you do have your combat gear. How much ammo you're carrying is reloads you're carrying is tracked. What armor you're carrying is tracked. What type of food and water supplies do you have? That's all tracked, because if you're out in the field, there's a big survival mechanic. You could be stuck out there and you're now in the middle of nowhere, radiation on both sides of you. You're trying to forage. There's no meat, and winter's coming, and you could starve to death out in the field. That is a very realistic fear. This is designed that you're always worried about what could happen if you're too far away from home base. It does have kind of a class system. They call them archetypes that you can play. This game is really focused, though, on you being military. It does provide some backgrounds that you can take for civilian characters. Perhaps your local population that got dragged up in the war. But it is much more heavily focused on the military-style archetypes that would be stuck in this conflict, whether you're on the NATO or Soviet side. Just please don't play the butter bar officer, because I would like to find my way home, please. It does have 2 character generation systems. One is, again, you just take the archetypes and then you add a couple bonuses to character attributes. The other is the life path system. Now, this is easier than the life path system in the Witcher RPG, which really focuses more on background flavor. This background life path system does directly impact the skills and attributes that you have access to. It's slightly easier, though, to engage with than The Witcher. However, my favorite all-time life path system was the one that came out for MechWarrior 3rd Edition RPG. That one there was a companion article, or after you had MechWarrior Companion and a couple other books, someone had gone through and taken on all the life paths that were available through multiple BattleTech and MechWarrior books, and had come up with an almost 300-page long document with all the life path options that your character could split, and all the tree directions that they could go split off through to create your character generation through the life path system. Though that's much more complicated, I do prefer it, just because you have so much more granular control and understanding of your character's background, and can also be used very nicely to create NPCs, and all their background is filled out with you as the GM. This system is much more simplified, where you essentially just, what is your childhood like? Did you take anything prior to military service? Were you drafted immediately after graduating high school because of the Twilight War kicking off? This one, though, really big focus, again, on assuming you're probably NATO or a local in the area, though you can start off with maybe you're a defector from the Soviet Union, or maybe if you like talking in amazingly good Russian accent, you could also use this to play as the Soviet side during your patriotic invasion of all the imperialist capitalist dogs' homelands. Which I always find it funny when the communists complain about those imperialist dogs, and yet they have invaded more countries than said imperialist dogs. Again, the artwork in both manuals is very nice. The combat system, though, and the reason why I alluded it to being a war game, is I do feel reading through the combat system, I need to play it before I can finally make a determination. Whoa. But their reliance on hex for what type of grid you are, facing requirements, how they handle the cover system. This is, to me, a war game, this combat system. It is not a RPG combat system. It is very war game-esque. It reminds me a lot of, if you've looked at Modiphius's Wasteland Warfare, where they tried to tack on that RPG on top of their war game. This kind of feels like they had an RPG and they had a war game, and they put the two together. So you have your RPG components when you're engaging outside of combat, and then the war game components for when you're engaging in combat. Now, you don't need the hex maps that this comes with. As it says here, you can just figure out whatever scale you're using with the map, just draw in meters. However, because of the reliance on this for your line of sight, for your armored protection based upon the combat environment, I feel this does overly rely on the hex map system for you to be able to really play this war game that is included in this. I'm not sure what my feelings are about that part yet, just because I haven't had a chance to play it yet. But the reason why I think that's a disadvantage, having this very wargamified, this combat system, is a similar issue that Dungeons & Dragons has when you have all these spells that have tightly defined range requirements, or special abilities that have all these tightly defined range requirements. When you're engaging in Theater of the Mind, the Game Master will be able to have a better understanding of like the physical reality space between the players and the NPCs when he's creating it, and that can differ greatly from the player's understanding of the player space that they're engaging in. So often it can feel like it's coming down to GM fiat and upset the players when the game masters say, no, this reason why you cannot do it, this reason why you cannot do it, because his imagination, physical space is different than theirs. When you put it on a board grid, though, there's less ambiguity. Therefore, it's easier for everyone to feel that combat is actually more structured and streamlined, and be able to adhere closer to the rules as written when using those powers, those combat abilities. This really, I think, falls victim to that, where if players and game masters' imaginations are split in regards to their envisioning of the combat environment, I could see a lot of players getting very upset with the game master saying, oh, you don't have cover here, you don't have cover there, this applies, that applies, line of sight, oh, you wouldn't be able to see that, versus how the rules are written and they apply to that hex grid overlay. I think this really is going to force players to really need to rely on having a hex map with all of the variables publicly available for everyone to see, because there's a lot of instances in here, in my opinion, where GM fiat could really upset players because of how many variables the GM is trying to track to facilitate theater of the mind gameplay, and with how much it'll be up to their call, it could result in some less than stellar combat experiences in the system. And personally, I think it does rely a little bit too much on that hex grid in order to really need you to be able to play this, as well as just the math that it uses for it, the some of the combat rolls. It does feel like a war game and an RPG were put together rather than this being an RPG combat system. It does have vehicle support in here. So, and during some of the encounters, you can, for instance, encounter a Soviet or NATO forces with tanks. So those are in that you have to worry about. It does have all kinds of maintenance concerns with your weapons and your vehicles, which since supply lines have been shot to hell with a nuclear conflict, yeah, we may start out with this amazing tank that lasts 3 sessions because we run out of fuel for it. And now we're having to hoof it on foot. And we now encounter a Soviet armor patrol with a T-72 in it. And all we got is a poor M113 Concourse launcher to fight it. If you are a Cold War history buff / Cold War gun nut, this is probably your dream, this combat system. Because of all the references to old weapon systems that have largely been phased out or upgraded significantly. Again, you do have your vehicle support. You do have in here your base building mechanics. They call it the stronghold. Really, it's more of a FOB, or forward operating base, that you would be setting up. It does have some mechanics in here to keep that upgraded as a safe haven for you to return to. Though again, in post-nuclear war Europe, the idea of having a FOB that you can safely return to, I feel, is kind of unlikely. Then it does have traveling requirements. As I said, you had 2 levels of the hex maps. You had the tactical viewpoint for engaging in combat scenarios, and then you had the strategic level, which would be your main movement mechanic for deciding how often you have to do checks for food, your foraging checks. All in all, as an RPG goes, it's a slightly tough one for me. I always wanted to try Twilight 2000. This is my first foray into it, the Free Leagues one. I'm not sure how this would compare against older. The presentation of this RPG is top-notch. Free League has that completely blown out of the water on artwork alone, and on presentation alone. Having gone through the box and everything, that previous score, I stand by it. As far as an RPG goes, because it feels like it's an RPG and a war game tacked together, in my opinion, I would rate this probably a 15 RPG. Is it one that I recommend? Yes. It's definitely above average RPG. Because of the time setting fantasy, it's easier to put people in that headspace, in my opinion. This being a post-World War III combat scenario after the year 2000, I feel that it's going to be harder for newer generations. Like, just imagine in 20 years when everybody's plugging their head into Facebook like they do in The Matrix, them trying to understand the technology level of Twilight with, they had to stick in a floppy disk drive into the GPS to be able to try to get from point A to point B. I feel this is going to be slightly harder to put people in the mind space. It's also very military-centric, this RPG, which it does provide like options for you can be part of the local population, but it really assumes that you want to be ex-military and are now just stuck in the war zone and are just trying to get out of it alive, versus most other RPGs where you're the hero or Joe Schmo. This really tries to shoehorn you into that military mindset. Again, that stark difference between RPG and wargame put together to me, rather than it being it feeling like a coherent RPG throughout. If you like Free League stuff, probably would rate this much higher for you. If this is your first time, if you're trying to decide between this and OSE, my own opinion is I prefer Old School Essentials over this, but it looks like a very good post-apocalyptic, hard military science, not science fiction, hard military fiction reality that could be a lot of fun. There is, thankfully, because now post-OGL, I have to bring up people's content policies. Free League does have the Free League Designers Workshop system that they maintain, so there is some fan content being put out for this. On Drive-Thru RPG, there is multiple books for additional Cold War weapon systems. There's someone that put out an entire booklet. I believe it said 80 pages. I'm running off of memory, so don't hold me to that one. Of Ukrainian weapon systems that were available during the Cold War period. There's a couple adventures. There are a couple free adventures out there as well. This RPG doesn't have as broad a support as in their workshop as their Forbidden Lands RPG does, but this is also newer in having come out in 2021. So the proof will be in the pudding going forward, whether or not this will go down in the annals of RPG history as a big fan-supported one that everybody would want to jump into. But it's an interesting one. Highly recommend it, especially if it ever goes on a Humble Bundle. You'll see me shill it. Rating of 15. Again, above average. If you like hard military fiction, this is probably the RPG for you. That is this review for Twilight 2000, the 4th edition. I'll try to see if I can get my hands on maybe some other editions going forward. Maybe do a comparison between old Twilight 2000 and new Twilight 2000. Until then, however, thank you for watching. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe. See you next time during our next review. And may all your dice be natural 20s. Adios.